Hello, and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental nerds, Nick and Laura. On today's episode, Nick and I discuss living in DC. We talked to Ted Boling about career development, offshore wind, and NEPA. And finally, some beetles can survive being eaten by frogs. What? They go in one way and out the other, intact, alive, and haunted by what they've just been through for the rest of their lives.
That's the grossest thing I could ever, I don't know. Ugh.
I guess those carapaces are very important.
They're strong enough.
Are important.
Survive.
Never mind.
The more you talk about it, the worse it gets.
I know, right? Let's get out of here. Hit that music.
Congratulations to Carol Sneed for becoming the next NAEP Fellow. NAEP Fellow members are awarded by the Board of Directors to members who have made significant and substantial contributions to the growth and development of NAEP. Anyone that knows Carol has nothing but great things to say about her, and we couldn't be more thrilled about her receiving this award. Congrats, Carol.
Woo!
We appreciate all of our sponsors, and they are what keep the show going. If you'd like to sponsor the show, please head on over to www.environmentalprofessionalsradio.com and check out the sponsor form for details. Let's get to our segment.
Nick, have you been to DC?
I used to live there.
You live there. What is living there like?
Everybody that comes to visit you wants to go to the Smithsonian, and you're like, no, here's the metro line you need to get there. Good luck. So DC is really unique in a lot of different ways. It's got culture from everywhere. It oozes culture. So there's,
what do you mean it oozes culture? Because when I picture DC, I picture a bunch of businessy people running around at 110 speed with suits and ties on. Like, that doesn't feel culturally to me.
Well, I guess, food wise, right? And okay. To be fair, that is absolutely DC elite. If you talk about Congress, Capitol Hill, all of that, there's absolutely that. And it's a, go, go, go mentality. It is 125 miles an hour every single day. Yeah, and that's absolutely right. But there's also there's a lot of different cultural aspects to it. You get food from anywhere, everywhere, and it's really good. And that's really fun, really cool. But the hustle, bustle part of it is if you're not excited about that, if you don't love being in traffic for 2 hours, if you don't enjoy just pushing yourself every single day, it's just a really hard place to be. And a lot of people will leave because it's exhausting. It's an exhausting place to work. Everybody's in a hurry. Every single person there is in a hurry. So,
interesting. So do you have a favorite part of living there? How long did you live there?
3 years.
Did you like any part of living there?
Of course. There's a sense of importance to the area. It is always in the national news. Whatever's going on there, it makes news. That's interesting. I think the commitment to public engagement is very high, and the right to protest, the right to be American is very much on display in any number of avenues. One of the most interesting is going to public meetings and having 12-year-olds ask you questions about your project because they read it, they're interested, they're invested, and they want to know what you're going to do. That's the thing.
Yeah, that's what Ted said.
Yeah, you expect that to be the case. And it's not for everybody, but it's a really cool. I really do love it. I have a really odd nostalgia. Whenever I leave and I come back, it kind of feels like home in a way. It's especially on the Virginia side of things. I'm a little biased. I did grow up in Virginia.
Okay, wait, stop. What's the difference between the Virginia side and the other sides?
So DC is right in the middle between Virginia and Maryland, right? And so the DC proper is one region, one part of it, but everything in the surrounding area, Northern Virginia, Southern Maryland. And to say there's a rivalry there is maybe an understatement, but because there's all, the traffic is one of the biggest things that with DC, and people love to say that everyone in Virginia says the Maryland drivers are terrible and everyone in Maryland says the Virginia, it's kind of how it goes. And of course the Virginia drivers are correct, as Kara's shaking her head.
She's like, I'm Maryland all the way.
Yeah. But I don't know. It's a really, it can be a really inspiring place. Like you see a lot of change and a lot of progress happen, and it can be a really frustrating place too.
Yeah. Kara, did you live there?
We lived, in the early 90s, we lived in Silver Spring, which is on, if DC is on a kind of like a diamond, it's on like kind of the one point.
Okay.
And so we lived about a couple blocks from the Silver Spring metro station. So
Okay. And did you like living there?
I loved it. Yeah. But I was also much younger, you have to have a high energy level.
Okay.
Like that high energy. It might be different if I went back there now. But culturally, there are a lot of diplomats that live there from other countries.
Okay.
And a lot of, it's a very, I don't know if transient's the term I want to use, but people move into the area from everywhere around the world. So yeah, like Nick said, the food is incredible. You can get any type of food from anywhere. And there's lots of culture, sitting in the metro. I used to take the metro to work. You're just immersed in all kinds of culture. So it's a really fascinating place. I love it.
Cool.
I enjoy going down there.
We used to say like one out of every 10 metro rides is unforgettable for one reason or another.
Yes. That's about right.
All right. Well, maybe I'll have to go visit for a third time or something. And hopefully not when it's a 1,000,000-person march again. That was cool to be a part of, but not multiple times.
Well, everybody wants to come see the coolest, the touristy stuff. And if you live there, you are as far away from that as possible. It's just how you do it anywhere. And really, honestly, like the funny thing for me with DC is like, I did not realize what it was culturally until I left. The mentality there is just, but like, I think I've told you guys, like when I moved to North Carolina, like 5 p.m. on Friday at 4:30, everybody in my office left. I'm like, where the hell are you going? We have like 7 hours of work left. Like, what are you doing? And then driving on the roads, like it took me 2 weeks to realize I'm the only person dodging between cars to get to where I need to go. It's just, if you don't do that in DC, you'll die. You'll literally be killed by other drivers. But, in North Carolina, everyone's like, hey, man, place is still going to be there no matter when you get there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just different.
That was not a North Carolina accent, whatever that was supposed to be.
No, it wasn't supposed to be anything.
No, it kind of sounded like some other kind of accent.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to. I did not mean to do that. It does slip in every now and then.
Yeah, no, you slipped into something there. I don't know what it was.
Yeah. No, it's just kind of like, breathe. That was what I was told. Like, after the first month I was there, like, you need to breathe.
Yeah.
I remember
slow down there, city boy.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Taking the metro, it's like there's a right side and a left side of the escalators.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to ride the escalator in one place, you stay on the right. If you want to walk up up because you're in a freaking hurry, it's always the left side. And if you are standing in the left side and people are,
they'll tell you to move.
Yeah. It's like
There's
that.
Like an escalator etiquette.
Several cities in Europe are like that too.
Yeah.
You'll get bumped out of the way if you're in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you wanted to say on your experiences with DC? We didn't ask you. I can fit.
I mean, I've just been to DC the 2 times. One was the road trip after high school, and it was with my boyfriend at the time and his friend, our third wheel, and we did just a lot of like sightseeing stuff. And then, but they were both 2 punk rockers with very big mohawks in DC, and I have some really cool photos from it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Back when that was not common, and there's a lot of looks. There was, people probably would have assumed we were from New York City, but we were in Tampa, Florida.
Yeah.
And the second time was the first Women's March, and it was March, and it was very cold, but it was really cool to go to that with so many people and it be so peaceful. Like everyone was respectful and like.
Yeah, what was it like? Yeah, tell me more about it.
I don't really participate in a lot of protests and stuff just because I'm not an activist. I donate and do things my own way, but I don't spend a lot of time out, holding signs and doing stuff like that. So it was a different experience for me, obviously an important one, but my boyfriend's aunt wanted to go. So we're like, all right, well, we'll just all go. And it just like, we parked in Maryland. We parked probably around where you were, Kara. We parked there and then took the train in, and it was just like it was so many people, like a giant festival almost. But everyone was just so nice and courteous and friendly. And it was just, you don't get that. Even when you go to a concert, you bump into people and people are rude and pushing you over and stuff. But there were even parts where you get to like bottlenecks where corners are really crowded and you have traffic going in both directions. So people are pushing past each other, and it was still just so polite.
Wow.
So having that many people who were all there for a same good cause, it was really, really neat.
Yeah. And that's part of the DC culture as well, is there's always a level of activism. It's literally present every day. You can always find somewhere, some way, someone is going to be saying something about somebody or someone, something. It's just what happens.
Yeah. So, I would like to go back.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of people that can give you some tips on where to go. So.
Right. Including Ted, our next guest. So let's do his interview.
Hello and welcome back to EPR. Today we have Ted Boling on the show for his second visit. He's a partner at Perkins Coie LLP and was the Associate Director for NEPA at the Council on Environmental Quality. Welcome back, Ted.
It's great to be back.
So when we had you on last time, we really didn't dive too much into your career path. You started out as a trial lawyer for the Department of Justice and are now in offshore wind industry after stopping off at CEQ. So how did you navigate your career, and when did you know it was time to kind of move on to new opportunities?
Yeah, well, I went to law school to do environmental law, and I pretty much decided in order for me to be involved in environmental issues, the right path for me would be to be a lawyer. And so I went to Washington University in St. Louis, where the author of the NEPA treatise, Dan Mandleker, was the major professor for the environmental law program. And that's really why I went there. People said, oh, well, you want to do environmental law, you should go there. But, as luck would have it, at the same time, so I worked with Dan. Richie Lazarus, who's now at Harvard, was teaching there at that time. So I lucked out to become the editor-in-chief of the journal of what was then the Urban and Contemporary Law Journal. Now it's Law and Policy. And so I had Richie Lazarus as my faculty advisor for the first half of that year, and Dan Mandleker as my faculty advisor for the second half. And it just became this great experience from these two giants of environmental law that, in particular, Richie Lazarus sort of advised me on going to Justice Department. Like, you need to be an honors attorney at DOJ. It's the only way you can just get right into the practice of environmental law immediately. And so I interviewed twice. I went to Kansas City and then also to Washington, D.C., used the most of that opportunity. And I'd interviewed with law firms and that sort of thing, and I was planning on going to a law firm, but I told them all, but if DOJ comes through, that's what I'm going to do. And they're like, yeah, let's, go, great, do that. If you get it, we'll see you here in 2 years or so. And luck turned out, lo and behold, I managed to get it. I went to the policy section that was attached to the Assistant Attorney General's office and just got immediately into spotted owl litigation and all the, land management, biodiversity issues. I was in the thick of it right from the start. I argued a case in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals when I was just I think it was maybe a year and a half out of law school. It was a big spotted owl case, and it was a lot of fun, although I was hooked. And so for 30 years after that, I just kind of bounced around the federal government. And my career path, it's kind of interesting to use the word navigate. I would just say it was really more like a pinball in a pinball machine. That was just, I'd bounce into things and people would say, hey, would you be interested in doing this? Right. I didn't look for another job really until about 2018 when I realized, okay, I'm coming to the end of the rope here. But I had worked with George Frampton at the Department of the Interior on detail from DOJ, worked on the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument and Tongass National Forest stuff. And then when he went over to the Council on Environmental Quality, he said, hey, would you come over here? And I'm like, okay, that sounds good. Spent 10 years at CEQ. And then, in 2010, after we'd written the Deepwater Horizon oil spill report and such, and I'm like, I think I want to go to Interior and work on renewable energy projects, because they were doing smart from the start, as well as also the offshore wind program, as well as also fast tracking wind and solar projects in the California desert. Worked on the programmatic EIS for solar in the 6 southwestern United States. That was great for about 5 years. I became deputy solicitor for Parks and Wildlife, and which was an amazing experience. And then, 2016, Horst Gretschmiel said, hey, I'm planning on retiring. Would you please come back to CEQ and take my job? I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I've always operated. I just like, I've been very lucky. I actually got to do what I set out to do and just kind of keep at it.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you wanted to work with the environment. You knew being a lawyer was your path. So what drew you to that? How did you know that? And are there any misconceptions about being a lawyer that you want to dispel on the show? Because I'm sure there are some.
Well, I caution anyone against, just thinking being a lawyer is an easy career path, or, that it's just, I'm oftentimes when I hear people saying, well, I'm thinking about going to law school, like, really? Okay. First of all, don't get into too much debt. Why? And what is it about that? For me, it's actually a civil rights and civil liberties law class that I had in undergrad where I just kind of clicked with it. And I did pretty well on the law school aptitude test. And so I just kind of knew that was sort of my skill set. I do have some lawyers in my background, and my father certainly wasn't one, or my mother. But my mother was a really great, and she was an editor, sort of like basically an English teacher at heart. I grew up correcting my friends on grammar and losing friends because of that.
Yeah, right.
But then, I just had this sort of affinity for the tools of the trade. And my dad worked for the government, so I had a very much a sort of a government orientation. He worked for House Appropriations Committee and then ran the Food and Nutrition Service for a while. So,
oh wow, yeah. So there you go. So what was it like when you worked as the associate director for CEQ? I imagine being a lawyer in general is just nonstop work all the time, but is it actually as crazy as that? And how is it different than what you're doing now?
Yeah, it was kind of hair raising. I mean, to be at CEQ, particularly, in my second tour, I was deputy general counsel and then general counsel of CEQ. And, I was in a counsel role, but to be actually responsible for it as associate director for NEPA was kind of hair raising. I mean, towards the end of the Obama administration, of course, our focus was primarily on the greenhouse gas guidance that we issued in August of 2016. That was a real labor of love. I mean, actually picking up and finalizing a document that I'd actually started at the end of the Bush administration. And I'll never forget, I started off with, Jim Connaughton wanted to try to draft something. And so that's where picking up from the Mauna Loa observatory data, like we ought to have in here, where is global CO2 levels right now? And I've been tracking that number ever since. And then I left that effort behind when I left CEQ in 2010. So to pick it up again after we'd done drafts, we'd gotten comments and such, and to bring that to closure was a lot of fun. Of course, we also had oversight hearings and controversy associated with it, and it was heartbreaking to see that pulled back and to make another run at it. And then, of course, in the Trump administration, there was the heavy focus on updating the CEQ regulations. And so working on the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, the rulemaking itself, I never imagined that an end point of that would be a rule that got announced in draft from the White House in January of 2020 and then finalized in a big event in July of 2020.
That's cool.
That, it was an experience.
I can imagine. I can only imagine, actually.
I mean, we saw the need for an update to the CEQ regulations coming. And certainly I would expect that the Clinton administration, the Hillary Clinton administration would have taken that on as well. It's just you're opening Pandora's box because you've got that great body of case law. And I'm still a huge fan of what CEQ did in 1978. Those CEQ regulations are written in ways that you don't write regulations nowadays. I mean, with these great lyric phrases in there about how, alternatives are the heart of the NEPA process. And so to mess with that, it was somewhat heartbreaking, but there were opportunities. I mean, frankly, it was a very, they're written at a different time where we were talking about sort of like paper-based exercises and to, so to redefine what do we mean by a page as 500 words and exclusive of graphics and actually, support actually a readable document in a new native format or make it technology neutral so it could actually evolve with public involvement as it progresses. Of course, we issued the proposed rule, and then all of a sudden we're in a COVID environment, and just, the walls came down. I mean, it's just, that all of a sudden we're doing everything by Zoom. And that was an interesting exercise on realizing the digital divide and how it became a nationwide digital divide, and a special importance on just, having spelled out the affirmative duty to agencies to reach the public that would be affected by their action. Not just, sit back and you say, okay, we issued a notice and we didn't get any comments.
Right. Right. Which, it's actually a very good point, because I think, it's easy for many of us to kind of forget that, okay, well, not everyone has internet access. Not everyone has good internet access. And a lot of times the people that you are trying to reach don't have big papers. They maybe how they even get their news can be completely different.
Yeah. So I don't know. And also, it goes back to that lyric phrase in the 1978 regulations about it's not about better documents, but better decisions. And so engaging the public it's a challenge, especially when you're competing against lots of other inputs and things that might get people much more jazzed but what you're talking to them about actually has an effect on the quality of their environment.
Right. Yeah. And do you have any advice for those that, because sometimes we have clients that don't want us to talk to the public, even though we need to. And sometimes we have clients that want us to talk, and that's all they want us to do is go talk to the public. So do you have advice for kind of threading that needle, getting good input for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about meaningful engagement. When I was at CEQ and I was meeting with the offshore wind industry, and we'd have certain developers come in and say, well, we had X many meetings, as though the number of meetings was a measure of success. Well, we ought to be able to just go ahead and build it now because we had X many meetings. So okay. And yet we're hearing from those communities about a lack of engagement.
Yeah.
And really, that is engaging with their concerns, whether you think them to be valid concerns or not. I mean, explaining the limits of technical and economic feasibility on what they'd want to consider, or, why their pet issue is not an issue here. I mean, it's still important. Frankly, I've seen a number of projects where people are very worked up about something, and half the battle is explaining, okay, I understand your concern.
Mm-hmm.
That's not us. Mm-hmm. And, or here's how we're going to actually make this better.
Yeah.
That's true with regard to infrastructure projects in particular. There isn't an infrastructure project out there that doesn't involve some degree of trade-offs, and engaging the public in that sort of decision making. It's a fun exercise. It's good. It's a good challenge.
It really is. You reminded me of a community meeting we had for a transmission line project as an EIS coming from Canada to New York City, and so you can imagine it's 6 inches long. And I think even just having a model of the line absolutely helped us explain that this is not what you guys think it is. It is not this huge mega thing that's going to destroy your backyards and do all this other stuff. But it's just the perception of the project versus the reality of the project. It was our job to get them to see that.
And it's a great challenge. I mean, you have to use all the tools of the trade to explain the context and such. I mean, we're actually, my firm, I am in the midst of litigation on a transmission project. It was designed to bring wind power from the high plains across the Mississippi into Wisconsin. And unfortunately, to get across the Mississippi into Wisconsin, you have to cross through a wildlife refuge. And so it's a question of alternatives to using an existing right-of-way, which is not the best location. I mean, the existing rights-of-way are right through the woods and through a town and that sort of thing. And so, but explaining the trade-offs and explaining also, yes, transmission is necessary. I mean, there's, you can't just wish upon a star or, hope for new technology, better batteries and distributed generation. There's no replacement for a 345 kV line. Right. But, explaining that to the public, to a judge, now 3 judges on the Court of Appeals, those are good challenges.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we're feeling all that here in Syracuse too with the replacement of the upper decker I-81 highway. There's been years-long talks of the alternatives and what they can do. And of course, there's trauma within the community. So there's so much to it, because it's not just a matter of trade-offs as one thing, but also lifestyles and undoing past harm and other things.
Yeah.
So anybody who wants to get in this kind of work, it's something you have to be passionate about, right?
and it's so necessary too. And actually, highways, I mean, it's the other part of my practice is on transportation. And some of these, like the highways decisions, they're really fun because you're going back revisiting decisions that were made years ago, or, and I was just listening to a podcast. I'm a big fan of podcasts about, the Embarcadero and San Francisco, and how people fought taking down the Embarcadero elevated highway for years until it basically had to come down because of earthquake. And now they realize, oh my gosh, this is actually transformed that part of San Francisco in a really good way.
Yeah, I'm really excited. They finally decided on a pathway to move forward, and I can't wait to however many years in the future to see it finished. The current overpass or elevated highway is not in good condition. So I'm looking forward to just moving forward on anything. But I want to circle back before we move forward on your career path and the pinball machine that you live in. And you mentioned that, you're lucky to have these opportunities in your career, but I'm always talking to people about part of being extremely accountable is also being accountable for the good things that you've done to contribute to your own success, because that way then you can share them with others. So I would like to know, what do you think are those contributing factors that you did that led to opening doors and getting invited to come serve in different roles? I think that's important for people to know that you weren't just lucky, but you showed up. What were your ethics? What for you is self-leadership? What drove you to get those opportunities?
Wow, that's a really good question. It's going to take a few days of self-reflection.
Yeah. We'll answer this on the next time you're on.
I mean, I think you might. Yeah, I have to refer you to a few friends to see what I think. For me, it's always been kind of focus on the fundamentals. What's the nature of the problem that we're trying to solve here? Really understanding the history behind, both problems as well as also really the law, the regulations, the applicable case law. And, frankly, I kind of live and breathe this stuff. It's a passion. I mean, there's a certain emotional component to it. It's like, if you're bored with your job, you really need to look into, well, okay, so what is it that's not motivating me here? Sometimes you have to, take a step back. Stephen Covey says, sharpen the saw. You need to do things, say, make yourself more effective. But ultimately, it's really being connected to what motivates you and what is it that you can contribute.
Awesome. I think that's good for people to hear. I like that. Okay, now we can move forward to a question that you were ready for.
Okay.
So Perkins Coie recently helped develop an offshore wind report with the Ocean Conservancy. What does the Ocean Conservancy do, and how does it tie into your work?
Oh, well, Ocean Conservancy is it's an organization I was very familiar with from my time at CEQ, working on ocean policy and the development of the Obama administration initiative there. And then later on, when I came back, working with the Office of Science and Technology Policy. So I knew the folks at Ocean Conservancy as really focused on sustainability, particularly sustainable fisheries, reducing ocean pollution. They're doing some great work in Florida for conservation of manatees. They're very effective advocates for funding for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So I just had a great familiarity as, former colleagues there. And so it's one of those great surprises of coming into private practice. And I was like wondering, so who's going to want to, hire me or work with me? And these, these colleagues said, hey, we're interested in doing a report on offshore wind. It would be like a set of recommendations on how to actually develop offshore wind that's consistent with the Ocean Conservancy's values of good ocean planning and ocean stewardship. And it was just immediately attractive to me because it's like, okay, here's an environmental group that's really interested in actually developing offshore wind in a responsible way. So I said, okay, let's run with this. We spent a lot of time working on that report. And it's a very detailed summary of federal law, as well as also just, ideas that have been percolating around for me because I'd worked on the existing BOEM regulations, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management regulations back in 2009, as well as also being involved in the Secretary Salazar initiative, Smart from the Start. And so I'd seen this for a long time, and I had these ideas that had been percolating along. It became an opportunity to express that, also really learn about Ocean Conservancy's interest in ocean legislation and improving resources for federal and state agencies to work on these problems. So it became just a fascinating report. I almost couldn't let it go. But however, as we were drafting it, this administration is moving out so fast on so many things. And we just, every week it was like, they just issued another, recommendation that we need to retool that recommendation because they're trying to stay ahead of what was coming. It became a real challenge. But it's been a great report. We issued it in May, just prior to Capitol Hill Oceans Week, which we just concluded. And we've done briefings for senior administration officials and other groups, and it's been well received.
That's awesome. Is that something that's publicly available?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's up on, well, I think there's a link off of my law firm's website, but certainly prominently on the Ocean Conservancy website. And then I pushed it out on LinkedIn and things like that. So, and actually just on Thursday, so we're talking Thursday the 9th, we published a little op-ed in The Hill. Amy Trice and I did. So Amy's was the lead of the effort for the Ocean Conservancy.
Oh, great. So it seems like scaling up offshore wind is a challenge, obviously. And do you think that it's ever going to get to a point of being a dominant source of energy in the U.S.?
Oh, I think it has to. Absolutely. I mean, you look at both the energy needs of the nation, the energy potential offshore, it's huge. And as you know, we've had some tremendous activity in offshore leasing, $4.3 billion of lease sales in the New York Bight, and then also followed by Carolina Long Bay, bringing in for just 2 lease sales, $315 million. It's just a lot of lease activity there. So there's a lot of interest, a lot of investment there. The long pole in the tent is transmission, and that is you don't build wind generation without having it planned into the grid. Yeah. Because the grid is this, as you know from your work in transmission, it's this dynamic load management environment there, and they have to plan to incorporate new generation sources. But we're in the midst of a national transition from fossil fuel-based energy to increasing load of renewables. And the offshore wind is that I would expect for certain parts of the country. I'm talking New England and the mid-Atlantic and possibly also on the California coast of the Pacific. It could be a dominant source of energy. And on California, BOEM has just issued a proposed sale notice for leases in Morro Bay and up in Humboldt. So there are limited opportunities there, but great potential. And different technology. There'd be floating wind technology out there as opposed to the monopiles that you see here.
Yeah,
it's an exciting area. We're working with clients. It's been a lot of fun to really be on the developer side of it all as well. And so I sort of have a foot in both camps because I'm working with like Ocean Conservancy advocacy groups, but now I'm also working with developers trying to do it right and really in many ways just at the start of the process.
Yeah, it's very cool.
I did want to give you an opportunity too to kind of talk through. You mentioned lease sales. So how do they work? What is the point of them? And then why are they so important to the industry?
Well, okay. So just basic understanding is that the Outer Continental Shelf is owned by the federal government. So that all that submerged land more than 3 miles off the Atlantic coast or Pacific coast, from 3 out to 200 miles is basically under federal jurisdiction. So you don't put something out there without approval of the federal government. And what these lease sales do is, unlike an oil and gas lease, which more or less carries with it the right to go drill, there's some procedural hurdles to go through, but you basically buy in the right. Sort of reinvented a lease system for offshore wind, where what you get is the right to go investigate the site and then come back with a construction and operation plan. But you really don't, buying a lease, you just buy an exclusive opportunity to propose development in that area. But the heavy lift in terms of environmental analysis is on a construction operation plan. There was some thought that, well, maybe we should front load it, as done with oil and gas. But the industry was so, it was developing. I mean, and frankly, the technology continues to develop. We're talking to developers who are planning on using turbines that don't exist right now because things are progressing to the point where they're getting bigger, they're getting more powerful. That determines how many turbines you're going to have out there. If you want to, generate 500 megawatts off of a given lease sale, well, is that is it 105 megawatt turbines? You're going to subdivide that by the increasing capacity. Recognizing that it is a dynamic environment, the leasing system was set up where it allowed for a certain amount of geophysical, geotechnical work, go out and figure out what the benthic resources are, as well as also engage with stakeholders, with the fishing community, with the folks who, have cables running through that area. I mean, the ocean you think of it as being so vast, but there are a lot of users. Certainly the Navy, the Coast Guard, I mean, they'll say, yeah, you think you could just kind of draw a polygon somewhere out there and put the wind power out there. Well, actually, there are a lot of claimants on that. And most of them, they don't operate by right. It's just by tradition and by sort of the laws and physics of navigation. And so finding the right place and figuring out how to deconflict for this new use of the ocean space, it's a complicated matter.
So you're telling me there are unwritten rules of ocean navigation, pretty much?
Oh, there are a lot of written rules in ocean navigation. Since last we talked, I was given a little sailboat. It's a little 30-footer, 1980 Pearson, a free boat. I'm doing air quotes for that because it will cease to be free once I put like the fair market value equivalent of money into it. And I'm well on my way there. But I've also sort of reacquainted myself with the rules of navigation. And it's a complicated environment. It's not for the faint of heart, but I really do love that.
Yeah. Well, it must be what draws you to it, though. I think that's your MO almost, going after the...
Yeah. Well, we talked about how I grew up sailing on the Chesapeake Bay, and that was sort of a goal of mine. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back out there soon.
Yeah.
That's really great.
Maybe even tomorrow.
Perfect. Well, I have so many dumb questions about the logistics of actually building offshore wind, but I'll save that for another time. There are other, and maybe this is just related too, are there other challenges in the offshore wind industry to get to where it needs to be?
Oh, yeah. We could go through a huge list. I'll say sort of top of the list for me is back on marine conservation. Right? So on the Atlantic coast, you have a number of threatened or endangered species there. But the bellwether of them all is the North Atlantic right whale, which there are about 350 surviving. And they really went through the eye of the extinction needle, if you will. The entire population is, as I understand, descended from 8 females. You can imagine, it's called the right whale because it was the right whale to kill. A whale who doesn't swim very fast, tends to, hang out near the surface. And it was easy prey for the whaling operations coming out of New Bedford, Nantucket, and what have you. But now it's under great pressure from particularly these giant container ships that come into New York and all up and down the East Coast, as well as also fishing gear interactions and that sort of thing. So there's a real conservation challenge there. And the real concern with regard to offshore wind is not the operations of offshore wind, but actually just the construction, the amount of noise. Because like all whales, they communicate, they can be harassed by construction noise. And you're talking about driving pylons into the seafloor there. So working through the regulatory issues and the timing issues, as well as also just how do you really help the conservation effort for the North Atlantic right whale. There are opportunities for just passive acoustic monitoring their location that could really help their conservation.
Yeah. I actually doing a helicopter ride in Hawaii and was really surprised at, like, we flew over and the helicopter pilot was like, oh, there's a whale. And then like, it was gone. Like, never occurred to me that like even the sound of a helicopter would affect the location of a sea mammal, right? So it's crazy.
When I was working on the case that became Winter versus Natural Resources Defense Council in the Supreme Court, the Navy sonar case, I spent a lot of time with submariners, and they told me about just that sonic environment they live in, where they're hearing whales, but they're also hearing, construction, and they can hear helicopters overhead.
Yeah.
Within the way. I mean, their biggest concern with whales is the whales liking, to rub up against the sub. but it's a fascinating environment, and actually, fairly noisy. You have lightning strike on the ocean. Or I did have a similar experience in Alaska when I went up a Fish and Wildlife Service spotter plane out of Juneau over Teneke Inlet, and looking down into the water column at whales swimming. It looks like they're just flying in that beautiful clear water. It was just an amazing. I'll never forget that moment.
Oh, that's way better than my trip. That sounds really awesome.
That's the part of the show where we all get jealous. That's the.
Oh, I love it. That's really cool.
Okay, so that's all really great stuff, and we can't have you on without asking a couple of NEPA questions. So it's just, I can't help myself there. But it's funny. I've been mentoring a few folks on what NEPA is, and listening back to your previous interview, you had a really great description of it, where you called it democracy with a lowercase d, which I don't know why it's just stuck with me. So, how would you kind of describe NEPA to somebody who's learning it, and what resources would you point them to learn more?
Well, I would describe it as, frankly, I like the environmental democracy description because it's designed to inform decision makers and inform the public, and it helps educate the public about what the government is going to do to you and what your environment and what they're planning. It's sort of that sort of, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. Well, okay, let's define help. What do you mean? And also being open to public involvement. And that's the core of the idea behind environmental impact statements, and really NEPA writ large, is that it's ultimately a public education statute. Much of Title I of NEPA is geared towards advancing public understanding of the environment, its ecology, and ongoing issues. And the issues that Congress was concerned about back in the 1960s are ones that we haven't solved. We've got, in some cases, they've just grown more critical. And certainly climate change is one. In many ways, we talk about like the Cuyahoga River fires in the 1960s. Well, that was an environmental justice issue. We didn't talk about it in those terms, but our understandings get refined. I mean, concerns about impacts to biological diversity. I mean, it's not like we've solved that. We are in extinction crisis, and understanding the effect of government programs on that, or government actions, both from the standpoint of consequences and opportunities. You probably hear we've got an emergency.
I know. I feel like you have. You're talking about environmental crisis and all this background. It's like, Nick, are you pushing buttons over there?
Yeah, no.
That's my sound effect coming in here.
It's like there's a real crisis happening.
I'm at the office down at 13th and G Street in Washington D.C., and that we have that. So. Right. But in terms of resources to point people to, I really think that the CEQ website, NEPA.gov, that Ray Clark and then Horace Gretschmiel more or less created, and then I sort of redesigned, and we have the Citizens Guide to NEPA. We've just got some great resources up there, and so encourage people to use that for both practitioners as well as also just lay people.
Perfect. Yeah. And so I have two more questions for you on the NEPA front. Some of these are coming from conversations we had at the conference with different people talking about different things. And one of them that came up was the technology initiative that the Biden administration has. We want to be using technology in the NEPA process to make it easier, better, more streamlined, all those fun things. So where do you see the industry where is it with technology? Maybe where does it need to go? What are we missing when it comes to technology and using it in the NEPA process?
Yeah, I think that the area where I'd certainly go by the adage that a picture's worth 1,000 words, but a really good map I'm sort of map oriented, but can show interrelationships and show consequences and alternatives and help problem solving much better than any narrative description ever can. And so having the words backed up by or interacting with the real world, if you will. For me, I'm a big fan of Google Earth and just being able to kind of zoom down on, what are we talking about? Where is this? How does this relate to that? The more that we can make environmental review sort of live and relate to the databases that people use, people are mapping their way to and from locations constantly now, and they're pummeled with advertisements. Hey, you're going to be stopping by this coffee shop here, and would you, that sort of thing. But having information about, and did you know that this road is being studied to be realigned over here, and it would have this consequence. And did you know that your combined sewer system here is regularly, with the rain that you're experiencing today, exceeding the capacity of your treatment plant? That kind of information. I think the technology initiative is really exciting because it could help better link these environmental documents to live databases, to GIS layers that really get people's attention, and also, resonate for decision makers. So that, for me, the best aspect of the NEPA process is when you're actually using it to help involve people in problem solving.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a great answer. Thank you for that. And I totally agree. I think it's really interesting and exciting area. I'm really excited to see where we go in the next few years. And my last NEPA question, and I have to put a NEPA nerd alert out, and I swear it's super nerdy, but it's just a curiosity question I have. So technically you can take an environmental assessment and either it becomes a FONSI or you can decide to go to an EIS. And I think I've never seen the second one. I know it's possible, but almost in my mind, almost every time somebody wants to do an EIS or thinks they might have to do an EIS, they just do the EIS. So have you seen projects that actually start as an environmental assessment, get all the way to the end, and they're like, oh, you know what? This has to be an EIS.
The reason you don't see it is because it usually doesn't hit the light of day. I mean, it's basically the environmental assessment is being developed by whoever the proponent is, saying, we think we can get to a finding of no significant impact. And others look at it and go,
right.
I'm not seeing, what about this? What about this? And that, they clearly have a finding of no significant impact in mind. And people will just say, no, wait a second, that's not going to fly. I mean, to have an environmental assessment literally get converted to an environmental impact statement, you'd issue it to the public and you'd have the public say, wait a second, no, this needs to be an EIS. It's a good question as to, Ted, how many examples can you find where like the notice of intent said, we started this off as an EA, but now we're doing it as an EIS. I know those examples exist, but whether the NOI actually owns up to, we tried this as an EI, now we're doing it as EIS. Usually it's just sort of like, okay, let's let bygones be bygones. We're just going out with an NOI. But the 2020 rules changed the role of the NOI as the start of the NEPA process to recognize that there's a whole bunch of scoping that goes into environmental process, and NOI is just the formal stage of it. And it may be that, you have greater sort of use of environmental assessments to really sort of, marshal up, here are the alternatives, here's the effects. I mean, it sort of serves that purpose of an expanded NOI now, where we have a more fulsome description of both the proposed action, alternatives, and effects. And what do you think? So,
right.
So there you go. That's a long-winded answer as to why you don't have a whole lot of examples of EAs converted into EISs.
There we go. All right, Laura, I'm done.
Did you get your NEPA fill?
I did.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, I need my outdoor adventures fill. So we really enjoyed talking to you last time about your love of outdoors and national parks and sailing and all of those fun things. So what have you been up to since the last time we talked to you?
Well, let's see. All right. So that was April of last year. So I went back to one of my favorite places on earth, Ocracoke Island, north coast of North Carolina. It's,
nice.
It's got a little village at one end of it, but most of it is just wild natural seashore. It's wonderful. It's part of Hatteras National Seashore, and then just across Ocracoke Inlet is Portsmouth Island, which is part of Cape Fear National Seashore. And it's just an amazing resource there. There's lots of wild beach, and to just have that as, so accessible by ferry, thanks to the North Carolina Department of Transportation. It's a wonderful resource. I was also on the other side of North Carolina and with the Tennessee border around New Year's, between Christmas and New Year's. I was in the area of Great Smoky Mountains National Park and the Appalachian Trail, going through Max Patch and just some really pretty country.
Were you actually hiking?
Yeah, I was staying in a cabin and doing day hiking. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So, yeah. I didn't overnight anywhere, but did get onto the eastern side of Great Smoky Mountains where I hadn't been before, and saw elk.
Awesome!
And just
wow.
It was a wonderful experience because my kids were like, elk in the Smokies. And why? No, there are no elk there. Like, let me show you.
Yeah.
I was saying that in my head just now.
Right? That's really awesome.
Yeah. So I love, so I've been spanning North Carolina a bit. I was out at the International Association for Impact Assessment meeting in Vancouver, Canada, and saw some friends there, including Ken Weiner, who was at CEQ in the Carter administration. He's just a wonderful guy. And it's just, and I think Vancouver is one of the most beautiful cities on earth. It was such a treat to just be out there in the parks and running around. And it was a great trip.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah, that's incredible. And like I say, I always love hearing those stories from you. We are almost out of time, and I hate it because we could keep talking to you forever. But is there anything else you want to cover before we let you go?
One of the questions that we haven't gotten to is about just public involvement changing a project. I was looking around for, sort of famous examples of public involvement, and Natural Resources Defense Council has their sort of NEPA success stories and such. But it occurred to me that, I deal with public involvement changing projects on a daily basis. And so, so much of it is not just sort of like the big bright line, the agency was going to do this and the public completely changed it 180 degrees and they realized no. I mean, there are those examples, but most of it is just the sort of refinement and also changes in mitigation. I mean, I've seen this with, like California high-speed rail, where it's like, okay, we're going to build the Burbank to LA segment here. We just had a board decision on that recently. But the public involvement really is embedded in project design as well as also project implementation. And so, I mean, I see this time and time again. So I'm no longer looking for that big, bright aha moment, but it's really all the many subtle ways in which public involvement gets factored in or anticipated.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a, and it's totally true. And I love that happens, and it does on a daily basis. And it's it's a really neat thing. Last but not least, where can people find you if they want to reach out?
Well, at Perkins Coie and Perkins, PERKINSCOIE is the law firm. We got practitioners on the West Coast, the East Coast. We're kind of all over, even in China, although I haven't worked in China. It's a great law firm with a lot of really seasoned NEPA practitioners like Bill Malley, who's the managing partner for the firm worldwide. So It's a good bunch.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you, Ted, so much. We really appreciate having you on.
Yeah, it's always a good time.
Thanks. All right. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
That's our show. Thank you, Ted, so much for joining us today. Please be sure to check us out each and every Friday, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Bye.
See you, everybody.